I know, other booktubers have already posted their May reviews. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mary. It's been a long time since I've read as voraciously as what I've been able to do in 2021. So the purpose of this video is to do a recap of what I was able to finish in May. If you're participating in a reading challenge in 2021, I will link a spreadsheet that I adapted from BookRiot. They basically put together a Google sheet to track reading with some tabs where you can view the statistics that I'm about to share with you. I did adapt it for 2021. The one available on their website is for 2020. But I kind of geek out about statistics, so if you're interested in some of that data crunching, I originally downloaded it from BookRiot. I love this log because it allows you, once you enter your data, to view two different reports. One is kind of tabulated statistics, and the other is a chart view. I love having this visual representation of my reading habits for the first half of 2021. In May, I was able to finish 9 full-length novels. I'll give you a plot synopsis, my overall ranking, and if anything, if I have any additional thoughts about powerful quotes, powerful ideas, or trigger warnings, I will also supply those as we just chat about books. Okay, let's go. Writers and Lovers was my first Lily King novel. I believe I came across this in another booktuber's recommendations. The synopsis of the novel is what really hooked me in. Writers and Lovers is a creative coming of age story about a young woman who's sort of committed to writing as her life navigates some fairly major hurdles brought about by breakup of a major relationship, the recent death of her mother, and the usual bumps that a writer encounters trying to do something creative and then turn that creative artifact into a published novel. She just has a charming personality. Lily King has dumped just about every conflict that you can imagine on her character at the onset of this novel. She's living that almost stereotypical artist in a garret, starving artist's life. She's renting a room which is basically described as a potting shed on the side of somebody's garage. So it's not just a garage, it's the shed off the garage. So that's the level of conflict that we see in this character. But she is so graceful, she is so passionate, she is so devoted to her craft, not just in theory, but she is living the life. She has wonderful work ethic. She excavates all that she can out of her situation in terms of, as she's waiting tables, she's also, of course, that observer of human nature and dialogue and conflict and just the nitty-gritty of human life. It's a wonderful exploration of grief, especially between a mother and a daughter. I especially recommend this book for people who are attempting to live a creative life or who are committed to living a creative life, because I think the tensions that you face if you're a writer or a painter or a photographer or a dancer or a singer, any kind of musician, it's a unique world that you ultimately have to learn how to navigate. The way Lily King handles relationships is just stunning. It's beautifully, beautifully written. For myself, I'm going to give this novel 5 stars. For a general audience, I would give this novel probably a 3.5 star. And the difference is really, I think if you're not interested in creativity or in that kind of coming of age angst that is unique to creative development, then I think this book won't have as much impact for you. The next book I want to talk about is Celeste Ng's Everything I Never Told You. It's a family drama based on a girl who has vanished. It sounds like a spoiler, but it's not. The premise of this book is that Lydia is dead, but her family doesn't know it yet. So the book begins with the vanishing of a Chinese-American high school student. But really what the book explores is within that dynamic of an immigrant family and assimilation and cultural stereotypes, how individuals navigate some of those pressures to varying degrees of conflict or success. And essentially the family is having to come to terms with the fact that they have found that their favorite daughter, who everyone believed was a studious, kind of perfect child, actually did not at all live up to any of those cultural stereotypes. And it's about the lies that families tell themselves, the lies that they create. When parenting is more about expectations and less about the individual child, it's quietly devastating. I gave it 3 stars. I can see it being interesting to a young adult audience for high school students ages, let's say 10th grade and up. I think it would be higher interest to that demographic than it was for me. Let's go back to creativity with Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Now, Big Magic is a book that anyone interested in creativity should read. It is brilliant. I think that her TED Talk on creativity, which you can find linked in the description below, is an excellent sampling of this nonfiction meditation on the creative process. So she certainly demystifies it. She puts craft before ego. Ranking 5 out of 5. This belongs on the shelf of any creative. That is a perfect segue to T.J. Klune's The House in the Cerulean Sea. This is an example of the creative, kind of whimsical, inventive novel that I just adore. I'll read the premise from the back. Linus Baker is a by-the-books caseworker in the department in charge of magical youth. So some echoes of Harry Potter there. At 40, he lives in a tiny house with a devious cat and his old records for company, but his quiet life is about to change. Linus is summoned by extremely upper management and given a curious and highly classified assignment. Travel to an orphanage on a distant island and determine whether 6 dangerous magical children are so dangerous, in fact, that they're likely to bring about the end of days. So, for example, one of the characters is nicknamed Lucy, which is short for Lucifer. And the first half of this book sets up Linus and his kind of dismal bureaucratic life. And I think that my only criticism of this book is that perhaps it would have been easier on the reader to slip into the story if it had started at the house with the children and then done a quick flashback to provide some of that background information on Linus Baker and kind of the bureaucracy of the magical system of these orphanages, and which are just kind of not really orphanages because the children are never expected to fully integrate with society. It operates on a couple different levels. It is an allegory for disability in public schools, if you care to think about this on an allegorical level. But it's, in the end, it has such an uplifting, positive message. But even that would not do for me what T.J. Klune does, which is to take Linus Baker through this amazing process of transformation. His character arc is so interesting, so believable, so charming. I will read anything by T.J. Klune. He has a book that is due to be published soon. I'll insert the cover here because, of course, it is one of the 2 new releases in June that I will be picking up. Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead is magical in a completely different way. This is probably the most enigmatic, philosophical novel I've read in the past 5 years. Well, since The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. And this is a Polish writer, Olga Tokarczuk. I'm sorry, I've probably completely mangled her name. This is, if I were doing a dissertation on contemporary literature, I would really be drawn to this, and it's the ecological themes. If you are willing to look at ecological theory or critical animal theory or any of those kind of peripheral fields in the study of literature, this really checks all of those boxes. The main character is a recluse living in a town in Poland that borders Czechoslovakia. People in the village, specifically hunters, start showing up dead in extremely unique and mystifying scenes that seem to suggest animals are doing the killing. There's some really interesting ways to think about this character in terms of reliability, starting right out the gate. She's an older woman. She's othered by her community. She has this unified theory of astrology that really threatens to derail the book, but if you can get beyond that, this is a character who doesn't even bother to learn people's real names. She calls people by their truer name, which is basically her nickname, the nickname that she's given them based on their characteristics. So you have Bigfoot is one of the early dead bodies that we come across. Dizzy is her friend who a younger man who she's working with in order to translate William Blake. If you're interested in alterity or othered voices, I think this covers just about everything. She's treated as mentally disabled by just about everybody she encounters. The protagonist has all that gritty authenticity that Dostoevsky brings to Crime and Punishment. There are moments in this book where it was just like laugh out loud. She diagnoses some of the men she encounters. She sort of gives her own diagnosis. Testosterone Autism, which is the title of chapter 2. I started to annotate the book late as I was reading, and I certainly will go back and reread it and annotate because it's just absolutely mesmerizing. And of course, I feel like the first time I read a suspense like this, I don't think I've ever encountered a literary suspense quite like this. So the second time I read it, I'll be really poring over for just the beauty and the philosophy. Whereas the first time I read it, I was more interested in just figuring out where this thing was going, what kind of mysterious plot we were looking at. I think this is the best book I've read so far in 2021 and absolutely give this 5 stars. Julia Whelan is one of my favorite narrators on Audible, and she wrote a novel based on a year that she spent in Oxford. So this is a fictional account of that year. It's basically a love story. The young intellectual who's gone to Oxford to study for a year, and she has an unexpected romance with one of her professors, and he's kind of a twat when they meet. He comes off as very chauvinistic, and then of course, without any spoilers, there are complications, and it's just a lovely story, beautifully narrated. The settings are gorgeous. The relationship between Ella Durant and Jamie Davenport has all the features of a cinematic classic Hollywood tale, and in fact it has been picked up by the movies. It's under production, I believe. If they cast this properly, it's just going to be a beautiful film. Popcorn read, Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is just a fun read. I am counting it towards my 9. Sometimes after a hectic day at work, I just need to put on my earbuds and go for a 4-mile walk and listen to something like this. 2 more to talk about. One is nonfiction, Deep Work by Newport. I think this is a fantastic read for anyone, especially after our COVID year where we've had an opportunity to reassess workflow, how we spend our time, increasing perhaps our digital workload. This book is a defense of deep work. If you're an introvert, you probably have a natural inclination to deep work. It is that quiet space where you can go. Newport is a computer science professor at Georgetown, prolific publishing. As far as credibility and ethos, he certainly has a solid platform to delve into the questions of what constitutes deep work, how do we maximize our ability to connect to our own deep work, and how can corporations capitalize on brain science into deep work and productivity. So I do highly recommend this. I'll link some below. There are enough full-length YouTube reviews of this work that I don't necessarily feel that I have anything to add to those synopsises and those reviews. But I will say, in many ways, it helps me rethink our goals as educators for how to connect our students to critical thinking and what that means and what deep work looks like, whether you're in a classroom, the boardroom, or a corporation. Fascinating research-based nonfiction text on what deep work is, how things like email, instant messaging, any social media, by definition, erodes our ability to connect to deep, authentic work, and offers several workarounds. So if you agree with his research, then he gives you practical tips to designing your own productive day, walking right up to that point of those conversations that you can have with your boss to ensure that you're able to connect to your own deep work potential, which is essentially what you're being paid to do. Subtitle is Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. He has several other titles that are now on my to be read list. Last but certainly not least, I've started 2 different novels written by Diane Setterfield. Absolutely was enthralled with one of them. For whatever reason, hectic modern life, I had set those aside or abandoned them. Sometimes that just happens through no fault of the book itself. I take full responsibility for that, but I did commit to, and finish in a flurry of reading the 13th tale. This is basically, the premise is an immensely popular writer of literary fiction commissions a younger biographer who was sort of reared in a bookstore to write her biography. Let's read from the back. My light is fading because we're getting a late afternoon thunderstorm. Reclusive author Vida Winter, famous for her collection of 12 enchanting stories, has spent the past 6 decades penning a series of alternate lives for herself. Now old and ailing, she is ready to reveal the truth about her extraordinary existence and the violent and tragic past she has kept secret for so long. Calling on Margaret Lee, a young biographer troubled by her own painful history, Vida disinters the life she meant to bury for good. Margaret is mesmerized by the author's tale of Gothic strangeness, featuring the beautiful and willful Isabel, the feral twins Adeline and Emmeline, a ghost, a governess, a topiary garden, and a devastating fire. Together, Margaret and Vida confront the ghosts that have haunted them while becoming finally transformed by the truth themselves. So this is very redolent of several classic romantic Gothic tales, specifically Jane Eyre. Many echoes of that novel through this. Beautifully written. 4 stars on this one. I will encourage you to pick it up if you are a fan of 19th century Gothic literature. Then this will be right up your alley. It is scrumptiously written, specifically more than any other novel I've read this year. The settings themselves are almost characters that connect to theme and echo other novels in our literary past. So if that is interesting to you, yes, run, don't walk. Grab a copy of this book. So even in the uber busy month of May, I'm very pleased to have been able to commit to reading to the degree of moving through 9 books. And that's not 9 books of speed reading, although I do have some tips. I'll put together a video outlining some of the ways that I'm able to hit my reading targets fairly painlessly, and some of the positive impacts I've noticed of reading this voraciously in 2021. If you hit subscribe and the little bell icon, you'll be notified every time I upload a video. If you have any recommendations you'd like to pass on to me, drop them in the comment field. Thanks so much. See you next time. Ciao.